Okay, so today we are doing primates, technically non-human primates, and we're going to be looking at all kinds of different primates, and we'll be looking at primates here and there, and little primates and big primates, and prehensile tail curling primates, and you might wonder sometimes, what's our big point here? Why should we be studying all these different forms of primates? And for me, there's a key paragraph on page 75 of Lavenda and Schultz. It's the most important paragraph, I believe, but they bury it here, right above that section on what is ethnoprimatology. There's this key paragraph about summarizing primate life and primate adaptations. And basically what they're saying here, and what I want you to keep your mind on most of all, is that when we look at non-human primates, they are diverse, flexible, and creative. So we see a huge range of forms of life among the primates and different adaptations across the species and across different groups. And so that makes us, we have to be careful of two things that happen to us when we look out into the world of non-human primates. The first one that happens to us is we assume that some primate is just like us, or that we can see our own behavior clearly reflected in another primate. And I want you to be careful of that, because we see a whole bunch of different ranges of behavior among the non-human primates. And the second big point here is that when we describe the behavior of one group of primates, be careful not to assume that then all the groups are like that. So when we talk about chimpanzees, don't assume that those are just like the bonobos, that are just like the baboons, etc. And even within those primate species, there are variations by group and even by individual. And so we have to be very careful about making these kinds of, there's not just one model of primate life. And then the main point for me, the question that Lavenda and Schultz pose here is, what can the study of what can the study of primates tell us about human beings, or what we might call the human primate? Well, what we learn, if we know how flexible, creative, and diverse the non-human primates are, then we can extrapolate to understand that perhaps they don't tell us one thing, they tell us how diverse, flexible, and creative we can be as the human primate, since we are so closely related to these non-human primates. So if we see diversity, flexibility, and creativity and resilience among the non-human primates, that's probably what we can expect when it comes to lessons about human behavior, human beings, is that we are also diverse, flexible, and creative. So those are the two main points when you were talking about the dental formula and tails and facial projection of these primates, and you're thinking, what is this all for? Try to sort of zoom out a little bit sometimes to think about it as we're surveying the diversity of primate life in order to understand also the diversity of human life as well. I want to start, well, we will start with the article that I sent you, What Are Friends For? But we'll be bouncing between that and the chapter in order to get a sense of the baboons in their relationship to other primates. So we'll be talking about what Barbara Smuts was studying among the baboons in relationship to trying to get a sense of how the baboons fit into our primate picture and our evolutionary picture. And after many years of teaching this article, I've reduced it to 5 Bs in a row, great alliteration. Beware of being bamboozled by baboons. By that, I mean that when we come to an anthropology class, some of us are already primed, and we read an article like this, and there's baboons running around and they're grooming each other and doing things to each other. And we're primed to believe that this is because they're just like us, and that they're very evolutionarily close to humans. So the first point I want to make here is that baboons are actually not that evolutionarily close to humans, at least in relationship to some of the other primates that we're going to be, non-human primates that we're going to be talking about. So she did not choose them because they were supposed to be close to us evolutionarily speaking. They aren't actually that close. Now, baboons are part of a group that we've read about and some of you had questions about, so I'm going to talk about this straight on here. Baboons are old world monkeys. And so they are closer to humans than New World monkeys are. Now, this seemed to confuse, or was a question that some of you had about why do anthropologists separate Old World monkeys from New World monkeys, or where do we come up with these terminologies? So I think we need to think about that for a second. Here's the world. The term New World and the term Old World are actually a slightly ethnocentric. I don't prefer them, but they are part of our conventions. Basically, if you remember, Christopher Columbus is coming from this part of the world and sails off and is trying to get to this part of the world, but runs into the Americas. And he lands down here in the Caribbean, and he thinks he's in India or somewhere off the coast of India. And so that's where we get names for the Caribbean like the West Indies. And that, of course, is famously why we started calling whole groups of people, or the Europeans did, Indians. But eventually, people figured out that this was a different world than Asia, and that it became known as the New World in relationship to the Old World. So when we use the term Old World, we're talking about Eurasia and Africa. And when we use the term New World, we're talking about North and South America. So as I said, it's a bit ethnocentric, actually, to use these terms. I prefer to use to either talk about Europeans or Asians or Eurasia, if we're talking about the continent, or Africa, or the Americas, because that's a little bit more up to date. But in terms of the evolutionary stuff, there is a bit of reason to the Old World, New World. So to summarize something we'll be talking about in the next two classes, all of the good, well, most of the good evolutionary stuff when it comes to human evolution and the apes and their relationship, all the good stuff comes to us in Africa. And so for millions of years, all the fun stuff in human evolution is happening in Africa. There are migrations into the Middle East and then into Eurasia, and then eventually, and much later, in fact, people about 15,000 years ago come into the Americas. So in some ways, in evolutionary terms, it is true that Africa is the homeland of human evolution, and these other places are later places of habitation for human beings. So in fact, when we talk about Old World, this is an older world in terms of the human settlement and human habitation than the Americas. It's still, like I said, a little bit of an ethnocentric term because it's assuming that everything over here is old and everything over here is new, when in some ways they're equally old and new at that point in time. Anyway, that's where we get New World monkeys refers to monkeys that inhabit the Americas. whereas old world monkeys are mostly in Africa, but really also in Eurasia as well. So let's talk about the New World monkeys a little bit. New World monkeys are technically termed platyrrhines. They're also known as flat-nosed primates. So they have broader, flatter noses than the others. All of the New World monkeys are tree dwellers. They're all arboreal, so they are all in the trees. They are generally, some overlaps, but they're generally smaller in body size than some of the old world monkeys. And some of them have, as one of you noted, they have prehensile tails. I don't know if you've ever seen an opossum being able to curl its tail. Some of the New World monkeys, not all, have these tails that can curl. And in addition to having grasping hands and toes, which is a feature of most primates, they have a grasping tail that can curl around and help them to do things in trees. The reason we call them New World monkeys is because they were evolving separately in the Americas, in what we know as the New World, from about 40 million years ago. And in evolutionary terms, when I say about, I mean about. I think if you look at this, we'll look at this chart later on page 78, but you can kind of keep that out as a reference point. I think they have it there at 42 million years ago. It's, who knows, we're not going to be able to get an exact number on that, but a very long time of separation from what was going on in other parts of the world. So that was the last common ancestor between the New World monkeys. Oh, let's look at some New World monkeys. So here's some monkeys that you might see if you were in Central or South America. We usually don't see them much in North America unless someone's cruelly brought them here. The capuchin monkey, the cotton-headed tamarin, the spider monkey, and the golden lion tamarin. There's others, but these are some of the more common ones. You can tell they're generally smaller. There's some of that curling, grasping tail that we've been talking about. This is going to sound funny, but I think they're a little bit goofier than old world monkeys. They're kind of funny. And so if you go there, they're jumping around, and you might look at them and say, I don't see it. I don't see how I'm related to these New World monkeys. And in some ways, it's correct. Human beings are pretty evolutionarily distant. We're talking 40 million years from the last common ancestor that would lead. And so if somebody goes to South America and talks to you about a capuchin monkey and doesn't see how there's an evolutionary relationship, well, it's a relatively distant one. It's still there. We still have, some primate features going on, but they're funny monkeys there. The old world monkeys, and here we're talking about the ones that are in Africa and in parts of Eurasia, are known as catarrhines. And this is also a term that is known as sharp-nosed primates, or as Lavenda Schultz actually put it, they have downward pointing nostrils. So it's not, I guess it's sharp, their nostrils are pointing down. Hard to see when we're all masked up. We have the broad-nosed or the flat-nosed primates and the sharp-nosed primates. And actually, humans are part of the are part of the catarrhines. We're one of the sharp-nosed primates. So this group includes old world monkeys, the apes, and also humans. Many of the primates, the old world primates, the old world monkeys, still talking old world monkeys, right, are arboreal. They're tree dwellers, but there are some that are ground dwelling. There are some that move primarily on the ground or terrestrial. None of them in the old world have prehensile tails. So there's no curling or grasping tails among the old world monkeys. Again, generally larger body size than the New World monkeys that we were talking about. One of the interesting things that Lavenda and Schultz note here is that there's a shared dental formula for old world monkeys, apes, and humans. We all have the same dental formula. The New World monkeys is different. We share a dental formula with across this group. As I said, these are the creatures that are evolving. So the New World monkeys are evolving in the Americas separately as of about 40 million years ago. And most of this evolution is happening in Africa and across Eurasia. So what is known as the Old World, but really Africa is huge. You cannot overstate the importance of Africa in this picture. Here's some old world monkeys. So we're still dealing with monkeys. We have the vervet monkey, the proboscis monkey, the mandrill, and there's a baboon. There are different types of baboons. There are some baboons that are more arboreal, and there are some baboons that are more terrestrial. Again, for me, they're a little less goofy than the New World monkeys. They seem somewhat more serious. They're often sitting on their tails instead of swinging them around. Larger, you can start to see perhaps a little bit more of the evolutionary similarities here. If you're primarily looking at old world monkeys. So back to this, you already have this part, right? Barbara Smuts didn't study baboons because they're evolutionarily close to humans. They're closer than New World monkeys, but they're not nearly as close to humans as apes. And so there's a divergence between the Old World monkeys and the New World monkeys about 40 million years ago. And then there's an ape-monkey divergence that happens at around 30 million years ago. Again, we'll look at this chart here in a second, but it's a good thing to refer to. It's a pretty good chart of where the divergences are where the most recent common ancestors are. Now, again here, the ape and the monkey is a lot of people try to put more evolutionary distance, I think, between the human primate and the non-human primate by saying things like, well, Darwin said we came from monkeys, that can't be right. And, I mean, there's a lot of difference between the monkey and the apes. And the apes, of course, are generally larger than the monkeys. And the quickest way, of course, but what's the quickest way to tell a monkey from an ape? Tail, no tail, right? So apes don't have tails. And so there's an ape-monkey divergence around 30 million years ago. And then the last common ancestor that would lead up to chimpanzees, bonobos that speciate later, and humans is probably in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 million years ago. So again, when we think about the New World monkeys and the evolutionary distance and the Old World monkeys and versus the apes, and then last common ancestor, chimps, bonobos, and humans at 6 to 8 million years ago. This is that chart that I was talking about if you didn't bring your textbook with you. So here we see, oh, by the way, we're not even going to talk about the lemurs. That's like a humongous 70, I think, 70 million year ago, more, 77 million year ago divergence. So we have that going on, but here's the split between old world monkeys and apes and new world monkeys. And then of course, you have the old world monkeys splitting off from the or last common ancestor with the apes. And then you have various ape splits leading up to here. This is on page 78 of Lavenda Schultz. It's a pretty good chart. There's another one I'd like to sort of focus in on here for a second, which is, again, talking about and we'll talk more about this next time, but the last common ancestor. So most people think that the orangutans branch off at about 12 million years ago. Gorillas at about 10 million years ago. Whoops. And then 6 to 8 million years ago, the last common ancestor, the lineages that would lead eventually to humans. And there's a bunch of lineages in here that don't survive to this day. There's an interesting speciation process, which a lot of people don't know because we know a lot more about the common chimpanzee, what is called the common chimpanzee, and the bonobo, which is sometimes called the uncommon chimpanzee because it's much rarer. There was a speciation event or process probably 1 to 2 million years ago that happens after the last common ancestor of humans, chimps, and bonobos. So if you want to know who we are most related to evolutionarily as human beings, we're equally related to chimpanzees and bonobos in the sense that they speciated later. So these would be the two primate groups we are most related to. All right, so after all that, if Smuts was not studying baboons because they are just like us, this of course begs the question of what she was studying them for. And as one of you pointed out, you're expecting that we're going to learn about friends and friendship, which we do, but her main object of investigation, or what she's trying to understand here, is something called the dominance hypothesis, or the male dominance hypothesis. And here I put it in quotes because in some ways I'm not completely convinced this is a hypothesis. I think it's mostly a stereotype that we absorb from television shows and cartoons and just pop culture about the origin of family life and why men are the way they are and why women are the way they are. So we could call this a dominance hypothesis. And maybe let's give it the benefit of a hypothesis designation here. The hypothesis is basically this: that males of a species are dominant, and so the females become the passive objects, the things that males are competing over. So the males beat each other up, they're in competition, but then they get to have offspring with the females. So then the males, and like I said, this has a kind of popular television show stereotype to it, right? The males are the ones that are then because they've done the competition and won the competitive battle, then they become the providers. They're the ones who are out doing the hunting and bringing back the meat and protecting the female and the offspring. And of course, if you're the male, who's won this competitive battle, and you're off getting meat and hunting and doing good things. What don't you want the female to be doing while you're off doing that stuff? Yeah, getting with a male monkey, and because the male has won the battle. You don't want to be off doing your protective thing and then come back and there's another monkey in there. So the idea is that the males are then demanding exclusivity or exclusive rights to the females, making sure, of course, you need to do that in order to ensure that your offspring are your offspring, that the father is the father, and that there's not been something going on behind your back. And so the idea is that then this leads up to today's world of nuclear families, or the traditional world of mom, dad, and 2.1 children. So like I said, this is we could call it a hypothesis, but it's you may recognize this as lore from popular culture, that this is the way things work, and we're only now getting into a different situation than the traditional male-dominated household, you might say. Now, baboons would be a wonderful test case for the male dominance hypothesis. And when we look at the baboons, we can tell that we don't have to worry that they are just like us, because they have a few different features which make them great as tests for this male dominance hypothesis. The first thing we know about baboons is that they are promiscuous. They mate with several, or they don't just mate for life. They are not monogamous, but it's not random. It's not willy-nilly. They don't mate with any. When we say promiscuous, it is still very specific based on a social structure. They also have very specific times. Probably used to call this being in heat or estrus. They only have intercourse when it is possible that the female is going to be fertile. So there are some primates other than humans that have sex when they're not necessarily fertile, but the baboons are only going to mate during these times. The males are extremely aggressive. They're very strong. And as Barbara Smuts says, they have teeth that are sharper than lions. So again, not just like us. They're quite different, and they're not afraid to use those teeth. She estimates that about a female would come in with a slash wound about once a year on average. So this is something that is a regular occurrence in baboon society. The other thing that's different about the baboons is the males are about 2 times as large on average in body size than females. So there's strong what we call sexual dimorphism in terms of body size for the baboons. Pretty extreme even among the primates. So again, we're going to pause here. Remember, I'm taking this article as a way to think about different aspects of primate life and locate these baboons in terms of how they match up to other primates. I just want to go over some primate sexual dimorphism by size. You can do sexual dimorphism in different ways, but this is simply by body size. Interestingly, the gibbons, who are part of the apes Some people call them the lesser apes or one of the smallest apes. But the males and females of the gibbons are about the same size, and there's not a huge difference. As Levin and Schultz say, there's not a huge difference there between them in terms of their size or what they are doing. There are some species of primates in which the males are somewhat larger than the females, but not that much, about maybe 8, 10, 15% larger on average at the extreme. Does anybody know any primate species in which the males are on average a little bit larger than females? Primate species you know and love. Humans are actually in this range. Interestingly, so are chimps and bonobos. So again, we talked about how the most recent common ancestor of humans, chimps and bonobos, those are the ones we're closest to evolutionarily speaking. It's also true that in terms of body size, we're kind of all within the same range of that. There are some groups of gorillas. There's a little bit of variation here between mountain gorillas and lowland gorillas, but the gorillas tend to be about 50% larger than male gorillas than the female gorillas. And then, as we saw, baboons are pretty extreme in terms of some of these primate species in the sense of being about twice, the males are about twice the size. But what I'd like you to note here, again, and it's the key point, is how much variation or how much diversity we see. We see diversity across the species. We sometimes see diversity of groups within the species. And of course, we're always going to see individual variation. When we're talking about body size, we're going to see a range and we're going to be talking about averages. So in chimp societies, there are going to be some female chimps that are larger than male chimps in the same way that in our own human societies, we can talk about an average variation, but that doesn't mean every one of a certain sex is going to be larger or smaller than someone else. With human beings, what's also interesting is there are different societies in which there is more sexual dimorphism. The men tend to be larger. So there's a cultural thing going on. And it's also has varied historically. So when I used to get figures for the United States, it used to be in the old days, we might say, maybe 100 years ago, that males were about 10 to 15% larger adults than females. And now when I look at it, it's more like 8 to 9% larger. Why would this change over time? What could have happened over the last 100 years in a place like the United States, where females and males are more closely approximated in body size than they were before? Hmm? Say that again? The environment. Yeah, what's changed about the environment? Ooh, well, that might be a perhaps more extreme change than we're thinking about. I'm thinking about the environment around a dinner table.
Hasn't the average like human body size like just gone up in general? So maybe like it was harder for like men to keep like that advantage as it's going up so drastically on both sides. It just kind of like slowly evened out.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a good point. Human body size among people in the United States has been going up in general. Um, so think about, I think we might think about it in terms of food availability, right? And who people might have prioritized if food is less available, who they might have been trying to feed more. So there's kind of the classic uh, dinner table separation where you're trying to give more protein. In the old days, you would try to get the workers, the people who were working in the fields, which were predominantly men, and you would give them more protein, and the girls got the cake and the sugars. And so you'd see a difference in terms of muscle mass, whereas I think in today's society, and this also has to do with athletics and those kinds of sports that people are allowed to do, it's much less that you might feed your children by gender so differently as you might have in the past. But yeah, it's a good point, Tom, about in general the increase in body size over the last 100 years. All right. Oh yes, we have to go back into Barbara Smuts now and what she finds. So one of the biggest findings, and one of you honed in on this, this is hugely important, perhaps the biggest finding of this, is how much the female baboons are able to kind of navigate the system to use their choices and not necessarily mate with a male that they don't want to mate with. It's not that it doesn't happen, but they are able to express their own choices and their preferences. And then Smuts goes into trying to figure out, or she starts to talk about what the title of the article is the idea of friendship. And by friendship, what she's talking about here is how close proximity various baboons are to each other, how much time they spend grooming each other. So this is not a subjective, she is not able to communicate with the baboons. We do not understand the baboons' feelings. We are simply observing from a distance and measuring, and then terming that friendship if we see particular baboons showing up near each other a lot. And interestingly, what she discovers is it's not necessarily the most dominant males that have more friends, it's the older males that have more female friends. And that these friends, and there's the title, What Are Friends For? Bring, having male friends bring certain benefits for the females, that they offer them protection, that they are able to get resources and feeding opportunities. And perhaps most crazy or fascinating about this is how much these male friends provide care for their infants, whether or not there's paternity there. And what Smuts discovers is that the male friends are more likely to uh, to, to give infant care than if it is simply male paternity. And that this can happen even if there is no known genetic relationship. Now, it can be both, and she describes how it is possible that one of the possible benefits that a male might have from being a friend to a female is that may increase their chances of mating later on. But crucially, during this time of infant dependence, it's a friendship relationship which is more likely to influence infant care and protection than it is a paternal or genetic paternity relationship. So we turn then back to our male dominance hypothesis to ask ourselves if we have supported this idea of the origin of family life as being rooted in male dominance. And we have falsified the hypothesis, basically, or we've shown that it doesn't have to be that way, even among a species like the baboons, in which the males are so much more clearly dominant, you might say. And so what Smuts describes on page 44, she says there's three ways in which this hypothesis doesn't hold up. That for one, you can have these long-term bonds of friendship without necessarily having dividing labor between males and females or sharing food. There are lots of societies in which there's a male-female division of labor, and so they come together in order to share food according to the jobs that they're doing. But in the case of the baboons, they're basically doing the same thing, and she says they still form these long-term social bonds. As we've seen with the promiscuous but not random baboons, you can have friendship or proximity and some kind of social relationship that goes on without necessarily demanding sexual exclusivity within the relationship. And again, as we discussed, and most importantly here, perhaps that males can be parents, fathers, if we want to use an anthropomorphic term, males can be parents among the baboons without necessarily having genetic or biological paternity. And so if we want to think about whether or not the hypothesis is supported, what we expected to find when we went in with the idea of the male dominance hypothesis, we did not confirm it among the baboons, and we probably can be suspicious of it when it comes to human beings and other primates as well. So it's an interesting article, in part because Barbara Smuts, like some of the other very famous primatologists, went into the field and with a number of ideas that people had about primate behavior and expectations about what non-human primates were going to be like. And there were, during this period, they basically uncovered a whole lot of difference, or a whole lot of other things about primate life that really no one was expecting to find. And one of the things is these forms of friendship and relationship over time that they would develop. Again, we can't peer into the minds of other primate species, and we can't ask them who their friends are and what friendship means, but we can observe it very carefully by doing this kind of empirical research. And Barbara Smuts was a real pioneer in this area. And so I like to assign this article because it gives you a kind of extended case study of a non-human primate group that is used to prove a hypothesis, or I should say to falsify a hypothesis without necessarily saying they are evolutionarily close to human beings. Any questions about this article or any of the primate groups we've talked about so far? All right, let's see, 6:48. Let's take our 15-minute break. So we'll restart class at 7:03 Horizon time.